Hi, my name is Ethan, and the day my wife became CEO was the same day she handed me divorce papers across our kitchen table without flinching. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're dead weight. I don't need you anymore." Then she stood in front of a boardroom full of people, some I trained, some I trusted, and erased me like I was never there. But what she didn't know is that while she was busy building her empire, I was quietly building a case. And when it all came crashing down, she wasn't giving orders. She was begging. Ever been betrayed so cleanly? It made you question if you ever mattered at all? The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like something's about to shift. I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a half-empty mug of coffee that had already gone cold. The sun was barely up, casting a soft, pale glow across the counters. The fridge hummed. Somewhere in the living room, the ticking of a wall clock punctuated the silence like a slow metronome. Across the kitchen, she stood at the sink, dressed sharper than usual. A gray blazer, neatly tailored slacks, hair pulled back into a style she usually reserved for investor meetings or fundraisers. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. "Big day," I said, voice low, trying to sound casual. I didn't look directly at her, just stared at the steam rising from the toast I hadn't touched. She gave a slight nod, not turning around. "Yeah, board votes this morning. Should be official by 10. She didn't sound nervous. She didn't even sound excited. Just efficient. It should have been a proud moment. My wife, CEO. Years of late nights, out-of-town conferences, and never-ending strategy calls had led here. We used to dream about this. I used to bring her coffee during her all-nighters, rub her shoulders when the pressure got too much. She told me I was her rock, but today something was off. It wasn't the silence. We'd shared many quiet mornings before. No, this was different. She was physically present, but emotionally gone. Then she turned and walked toward me. Not close, just far enough to reach the kitchen island, and set down a crisp, cream-colored envelope. No words, just the soft click of a pen beside it. A company-branded pen, not ours. "Take a look," she said, her voice flat. I opened the envelope without thinking, even as my gut tightened. Inside, divorce papers. She didn't sit down. She didn't explain. She just stood there with arms crossed, watching me read. And then, like she was finalizing a grocery list, she said, "I don't need you anymore." My breath caught, but I didn't gasp. I didn't slam the table or ask what the hell she meant. I looked at my hands instead. How still they were. Too still. I noticed the pen again, sleek, gold-trimmed, with her company's logo. I remembered when she used to carry around cheap plastic ones, always, asking if I had a spare in my jacket. The air in the room changed, not colder, just thinner, like someone had sucked out the oxygen. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't find the words that would matter. So I did what I've always done in moments like this, froze. I didn't ask why, didn't protest, didn't plead. My mind flicked to logistics, the mortgage, health insurance, my age, 52, how hard it would be to start over. And still, I picked up the pen. My hand moved on its own. I signed. Not because I agreed, not because I accepted, but because conflict was something I was taught to avoid. Keep the peace. Don't raise your voice. Maybe that's how I survived childhood. Maybe that's why I lost this marriage. She didn't even check the papers. She just said, "We'll keep it clean. No drama. The board respects professionalism." And that's when it clicked. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even about resentment. It was strategy. She had already calculated this. The timing, the image. I was inconvenient. A liability. Let's not make this personal, she added, as if the last 17 years had been a contract easily nullified. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I didn't have the strength, in that moment, to do anything else. She grabbed her keys. Meeting's at 10. I'll be out late. She paused, looked at me like she was expecting me to say something. Maybe she wanted a fight. Maybe she wanted guilt. But I just looked at the pen. She walked out. The front door closed with a soft click. And then the house changed. It didn't feel smaller. It felt bigger, hollow. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where the envelope had been. The pen still lay there, perfectly aligned with the table's edge. I didn't put it away. I didn't move. Just sat there with the quiet stretching around me like fog. I thought about all the times I'd told myself things would get better, that rough patches were normal, that I just needed to be more supportive. But none of that mattered now. All that remained was silence. And that pen. I thought signing those papers was the worst thing that would happen that day. Turns out, it was just the opening act. By the time I reached her office building downtown, the morning fog had already lifted, replaced by a sharp winter sun that bounced off the endless glass and steel. The lobby smelled of pine cleaner and corporate ambition. I'd walked through these doors 100 times before. Fundraisers, year-end parties, leadership dinners. Always as her husband. Always proud. This time, I was just there. No one stopped me at the front desk. I still had clearance. I still wore the visitor badge they'd printed for me years ago, laminated and a little faded. I told myself I was there to show support. That's what you do when your spouse becomes CEO, right? You show up. She didn't invite me, but she didn't tell me not to come either. People were gathering outside the boardroom. Her assistant saw me and smiled, brief, polite, like she was late for something. A couple of execs nodded, half-hearted, eyes already elsewhere. They didn't slow down. I wasn't invisible, not yet. But I was being filtered out of focus, like an image going fuzzy in a rear-view mirror. Inside, the boardroom looked like everyone I'd ever seen in glossy brochures. Long mahogany table, bottled water spaced evenly, chairs pushed in too neatly. The walls were glass, overlooking the skyline, all height and illusion. She was already seated at the head. Her voice carried across the room, steady, assured. The kind of voice that's used to silence falling when it speaks. She wore the same suit from this morning, but it somehow looked sharper here, like it belonged more in this space than in our kitchen. I took a seat near the corner, a few chairs back from the main cluster. No one said anything about it. I didn't expect a welcome. I watched as she moved through the agenda. Succession protocol, media statements, shareholder alignment. Her delivery was crisp, her gaze unwavering. Every now and then, someone at the table would nod. They weren't agreeing. They were submitting. Then the topic shifted. Next item, departmental restructuring. I felt a flicker. Nothing specific, just tension. She leaned forward slightly, folding her hands in front of her. We've identified several roles that are, frankly, no longer aligned with the company's forward trajectory. And then she said it. Some roles, she continued, eyes sweeping across the table but never landing on me, are simply dead weight that need to be removed. There was no pause, no shift in tone. She might as well have been reading a weather report. Dead weight. My name wasn't mentioned. It didn't have to be. Everyone in that room knew who'd built half their outreach programs. Who'd stepped in during layoffs and coached teams through morale crises? Who'd shown up unpaid, uncredited for 12 years of service? Because that's what a supportive spouse does. And now I was ballast. Nobody turned to look at me. Not even the guy I'd once helped land a 6-figure donor in a back room at a gala. Someone cleared their throat near the far end of the table. A pen tapped once, stopped. The kind of sound that would usually vanish in the shuffle of a meeting, but now it hung there, like punctuation. No one corrected her. No one challenged the phrasing. That word, dead weight, just drifted into the air and settled around me like smoke. I didn't react. I didn't flinch or stand or say anything clever. My palms were flat on my knees. My spine stayed straight. My mind, busy cataloging details. The pattern on the water bottle label, the scratch on the polished table near my elbow, the fact that her voice didn't shake. This wasn't spontaneous. It had been planned, rehearsed. I was witnessing a presentation, not a decision, and my part in it had already been played. The meeting moved on. More buzzwords, more plans. My body stayed where it was, but I felt like I was slipping backward, inch by inch, through the floor. When the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped the floor softly. People stood. Conversations began, but none drifted my way. One executive, someone I used to share Sunday brunch with, gave me a tight-lipped smile as he passed. Not cruel, just uncomfortable. No one said goodbye. No one said anything. I waited until the last person exited before I stood. My legs felt solid, but the rest of me, not so much. I walked slowly down the hallway, shoulders squared. Not out of pride, out of habit. It's easier to pretend nothing broke if you don't look down at the pieces. The pen was still in my coat pocket from this morning, the one she used to end our marriage. I touched it without meaning to, the way your hand finds a bruise. I stepped into the elevator and faced the doors, watching my reflection fade as the numbers dropped floor by floor. That was the moment I realized the marriage hadn't ended that morning. It had been erased long before. I sat in the car, parked on the 3rd level of the underground garage, engine off, hands still resting on the wheel. I don't remember unlocking the doors or even making it to the driver's seat. My body had walked me there on autopilot. The world outside was moving, people backing out of spots, elevators chiming, muffled conversation bouncing off concrete. Inside my car, though, it was frozen. I didn't start the engine, didn't turn on the radio. I just sat there and let the silence settle. It wasn't peaceful. It was thick. It clung to me. That moment from the boardroom kept looping in my head, but the sound had been stripped away. I could see her mouth move. I could see the way others looked away. But I couldn't hear anything. It was like my memory had gone mute from the shock. I replayed it anyway, over and over. The calm tone she used. How no one raised an eyebrow. How not one person said, "Wait a second." Not even as a formality. I had been erased, not just privately, but professionally. And no one blinked. I finally turned the key and drove out slowly, taking side streets home. I couldn't face traffic or the blare of horns or any more people pretending I wasn't there. Back in my neighborhood, the kids were coming home from school. One boy dragged a baseball glove behind him on the sidewalk. A girl with a pink backpack waved to someone across the street. Life went on. Our driveway was empty. Her car wouldn't be home for hours. I knew that routine well. I let myself in, tossed the keys into the dish by the door, and stood there in the hallway for a few minutes. I listened for movement upstairs, even though I knew there wouldn't be any. Habit. Then I walked into the home office, the one we used to share. It hadn't changed in years. 2 desks on opposite walls. A printer we always said we'd replace but never did. Shelves full of binders labeled by year, charity events, donor tracking, grant applications. I sat down at my desk and opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a file folder labeled Initial Pitches. Inside were the first drafts of her company's outreach campaign, messaging we'd worked on over coffee at midnight, back when the company was just a hopeful seed. Her name was on every header. My edits were in red ink. Page after page, there were my notes, tone suggestions, revised taglines, even small jokes that had landed big with their early investors. But you wouldn't know I was there if you didn't look close. I opened the next folder, financials from the first 2 years. I'd spent weekends sorting receipts, tracking spreadsheets when she was too tired to see straight. I didn't expect a thank you, but I also didn't expect nothing. She'd told people she built it from the ground up alone. "Every inch of this company is me," she once said at a press conference. I had been standing 6 feet away. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. I felt stupid. Like a man who'd shown up to a marriage thinking he was building a life, only to find out he was furnishing someone else's exit. It wasn't just the boardroom. It wasn't even just today. This had been happening slowly, for years. The flashbacks came fast, small moments, ones I used to brush off. Her first leadership award. I stood backstage while she accepted it, smiling. I took the photos. That one investor dinner where she introduced me as a great supporter of everything we do. Not her husband, not her partner. The edits she made to her website's bio, removing any reference to family. And me, always rationalizing it. She's under stress. It's just branding. She'll make space again once things calm down. But things never calmed down. And I never asked her to. I just let it happen. Back in the office, I opened a 3rd drawer, pulled out the external drive we use to back up drafts, plugged it into the laptop. More files, more documents with my fingerprints, none with my name. I clicked through them slowly, like I was reading someone else's life. A ghostwriter for a future that didn't include me. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. The thought hit me hard. Maybe I let this happen. Maybe I thought staying quiet was the right thing to do. A good man doesn't make waves, right? A good partner supports, steps back, gives space. But where had that left me? Supporting a version of her that no longer needed me. Or worse, never really saw me. I sat in that chair for over an hour. The afternoon light shifted on the wall, getting softer. The house stayed silent. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't break anything. That's not who I am. But I did ask myself a question I'd never dared to voice out loud. What if the way I showed love, by being quiet, by stepping back, was the very thing that taught her I could be removed? That maybe she didn't betray me. Maybe I taught her how. I closed the laptop, left the drive plugged in, didn't turn off the lamp. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet, but I wasn't confused anymore. I had been erased, and I had participated in it. That night, I understood something I'd avoided for years. Silence hadn't protected me. It had trained them. 2 days passed without confrontation. I didn't call her. She didn't call me. We lived in the same house like 2 ghosts waiting for the other to speak first. She left early, came back late, and the air between us was so still it had weight. I kept to the guest room and didn't ask questions, but I made one call. To David, my attorney. Old friend, semi-retired, still sharp. We hadn't spoken in a while, but his tone was steady as always. He said, "Come in. Bring everything." So that Thursday evening, I found myself sitting across from him in his quiet corner office, the kind with wooden blinds and a coffee machine that hadn't worked since the Bush administration. There was a faint smell of leather and paper, comforting somehow. I told him about the divorce in clean lines, no outbursts, no wounded pride, just facts. She left the papers on the table, said she didn't need me anymore. David nodded slowly, not writing anything yet. "You think this'll be simple?" he asked, more of a test than a question. "I assumed so," I replied. "No kids, no fighting. Just split it clean." That's when he opened the folder. "Let's look at what she had you sign." He took his time with the first few pages, flipping calmly, making the occasional mark in the margins. Then he paused, his brow lowered just slightly, enough that I noticed. "This is thorough," he said, turning the paper toward me. "You recognize this clause?" I scanned it. Legalese always made my eyes glaze. Non-compete, confidentiality, IP transfer, words like binding and irrevocable repeated like warnings. "I thought that stuff only mattered for business owners," I muttered. "You'd be right. But here's the thing. She filed it as a joint protection clause under shared assets. The moment you signed, you agreed not just to leave the marriage, but to relinquish claim to any intellectual contributions." Wait, what? Any ideas, projects, presentations, strategy, anything that could be tied to her company? You've waived your rights to them, permanently. I stared at the page like it had just changed languages. "She buried this," David added. "It's subtle, but deliberate. And the phrasing? This didn't come from a standard divorce kit. She had someone draft this specifically." The temperature in the room dropped. I leaned back in the chair. She knew I wouldn't question it. "Exactly," he said, tapping the edge of the clause. "And here's another thing. This part about transition oversight, it names a third party." He flipped to the appendix and slid the page forward. I read the name, didn't recognize it. "She's hiring someone to replace you, not just in the business, across the board. This consultant has been authorized to oversee transfer of any roles you held. That includes finances, estate matters, legal permissions." I blinked, then read it again. "So, she's already moved on. Legally and structurally, yes." David didn't say it out loud, but I could feel the implication. This wasn't a breakup. This was a hostile reorganization, the kind that doesn't leave loose ends. I looked out the window. The sun was starting to fall, casting long stripes of gold through the blinds. Office lights across the street flicked on one by one. People still working, still believing in the systems they belonged to. How long would something like this take to prepare? I asked quietly. "This wasn't written last week," he said. "This kind of clause work, it takes coordination, precision. It's woven into the foundation, which means she was planning this while still waking up next to you." I didn't feel rage, not yet, but something deep inside started shifting, like tectonic plates beneath a quiet surface. I looked back at him. "Can we fight it?" "We can question it," he said, measured. "But fighting it depends on what you want long term. I'll need time to comb through all of it. Meanwhile, don't sign anything else. Don't concede anything in writing or over email." I nodded. "Make me a copy of the full paperwork. Every page." "I already have." He slid a second folder across the desk, labeled, indexed. I tucked it into my bag and stood. "Thank you, David." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "This won't be pleasant, but at least now, you're not blind." We exchanged a brief, firm handshake. No more words needed. The sun had fully dipped by the time I got back to the parking lot. My car was one of the last few left. I sat for a moment before starting the engine. On the drive home, I didn't play music. I didn't need distraction. I needed clarity. The pieces had all been there. Her sudden promotion, the papers, the silence, the public cut in the boardroom, the terms baked into a contract I hadn't fully read. None of it had been impulsive. It had been sequenced. A strategy, not a fallout. I remembered her words that morning, "I don't need you anymore," and realized they weren't spontaneous. They were a line rehearsed in her head long before I ever heard them. I turned onto our street. Porch lights were on, neighbors watering lawns. One waved. I nodded back, just enough. Pulling into the driveway, I sat there again, like I had 2 nights before. Only this time, I saw the pattern. This wasn't about divorce. It wasn't about love lost. It was about control. About ensuring that whatever part of me had existed in that business, in that life, was not only removed, but invalidated. And if I wasn't careful, they'd make sure I couldn't even rebuild. That was when I understood this wasn't about ending a marriage. It was about making sure I couldn't stand back up. And for the first time, I considered whether walking away was exactly what they wanted. The thought stayed with me like a pebble in my shoe. Not painful enough to stop walking, but just enough to never forget. It had been a week since the papers landed on the table, a week since her boardroom declaration made me invisible with 3 words, dead weight. And in those 7 days, the house had become unnervingly quiet. Not because anyone argued or slammed doors, but because no one did. Her things were still in the closet, too many to say she'd moved out, too few to pretend she hadn't already left. The kitchen ran on silence. No morning radio, no blender, no casual humming, just light ticking from the wall clock and the occasional creak of the floorboards when I moved across the room. I found myself doing odd things, opening drawers I hadn't touched in years, standing at windows without really seeing outside. I didn't feel heartbroken in the way movies show it. No dramatic sobbing or smashing plates, just a strange hollowness in the walls, and in me. Even the dog noticed it, though we didn't have a dog. That's how quiet it had become. I imagined the sound of paws just to fill the air. I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was just tired. Tired in a way that years of compromise and small silences build into the bones. It wasn't just this week. It was every year I explained away her coldness as stress. Every time I said, she didn't mean it. Every conversation I rehearsed but never had. By the 4th evening, the file from David sat untouched on the kitchen island. I walked past it every day. At first, I told myself I needed a break before diving in. Then, I told myself I wasn't avoiding it. I was just prioritizing my peace. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to read how thoroughly I'd been written out. One night, I made tea I didn't drink. I sat with it for an hour before pouring it down the sink. That became a pattern, doing things for the sake of doing them. Rituals without belief. And slowly, the idea crept in. What if I just signed everything? No more lawyers, no more paper trails. Just disappear on my own terms. Keep what dignity I had left and leave the rest to rot. Maybe that's how grown-ups handled betrayal. Not with shouting, but with quiet exits. I told myself walking away wouldn't be surrender. It would be choosing peace. I even rehearsed how I'd tell David, "Thanks for your help, but I've decided to let it go." I convinced myself that justice wasn't worth the cost if the fight hollowed me out further. I didn't want to become bitter. Or worse, petty. Then Friday came. I hadn't planned on going anywhere, but the walls were too still that day. The clock ticked louder. The air felt stale. So, I grabbed my keys and just drove. No direction, just out. A few towns over, I pulled off the highway when I saw the glow of an old diner I used to stop at on road. Trips. It hadn't changed. Same cracked leather booths, same waitress with the tight ponytail and kind eyes. I slid into a corner booth, ordered black coffee, and watched the slow swirl of cream from a table nearby. I wasn't looking to listen in, but I caught it anyway. Two men in button-down shirts, loosened ties, talking over pie. I heard Claire's taking the product line national, one of them said, tapping his phone. Smart move. She always knew how to position things. Yeah, the other agreed. She built that whole division from scratch, didn't she? Then came the sentence. She had a guy who used to help. What was his name? He was around a lot back then. The first one shrugged. Probably her assistant or something. They moved on, talked sports, a new restaurant. Nothing cruel, just casual forgetting. But I sat there staring into my coffee like it had burned me. Not angry, not shocked, just small. They didn't say it with malice. They weren't mocking me. They simply didn't know. And why would they? My name hadn't been on the presentations. My voice hadn't been at the meetings. I'd made myself forgettable, and they had followed suit. It wasn't about fame. It was about memory, and mine was already fading. I didn't finish my coffee. Driving back through empty streets, I thought about what David had said. You can question it. He hadn't said I should. He left that choice to me. That night, I stood at the kitchen island again, looking down at the folder, still sealed, still heavy. I wondered, if I stood up now, would it look like bitterness? Would I be seen as the man who couldn't let go, the washed-up husband clinging to past relevance? That fear lodged deep, the fear of becoming that guy, the one whose name gets mentioned in pity, not respect. But something strange happened. As I stared at the folder, I didn't feel myself backing away. I didn't feel ready to fight either. But I didn't feel finished. I went to bed without eating. Sleep didn't come easy. But before I turned off the light, I slid the folder to my nightstand. Just closer. Not opened. Not yet. A small, quiet shift. But it was mine. I didn't know it then, but that hesitation, my refusal to disappear quietly, was already changing the outcome. The problem was, once they sensed resistance, they stopped playing fair. It didn't come with slamming doors or shouting matches. No courtroom scenes. No paper threats. It came dressed in politeness, buttoned up, well-timed, and almost gentle, like an offer you should be smart enough not to refuse. 10 days after the papers were filed, I stopped trying to clarify anything. I didn't chase down explanations. I didn't offer updates. I let my phone ring sometimes and didn't call back. Not because I was avoiding conflict, but because I'd finally figured out how to make silence work for me. I wasn't withdrawing. I was listening, playing small. On the surface, looked like surrender. But I had learned there's a difference between being quiet and being passive. I wasn't shrinking, I was watching. I stopped offering my thoughts in emails. I didn't suggest solutions. I left space in conversations and noticed who rushed to fill it. That's when you learn the most. At first, it was subtle. A shared calendar access quietly disappeared. A Zoom link I'd used weekly now led to a permission-denied message. I asked no one about it. I noted it. Moved on. Then came the emails. They were worded professionally, neat formatting, polite tone. In preparation for the transition, please confirm your relinquishment of administrative privileges by close of business Thursday. No context, no discussion, just assumption. Another one came 2 days later, a memo about internal systems realignment. My name was mentioned once, in past tense. None of this was personal, or at least that's what the emails tried to say. Standard practice. Workflow streamlining. Compliance. But when compliance starts to feel like erasure, it's not about systems anymore. I didn't respond, not yet. By noon, I got a calendar alert I didn't create. Check in with HR 1:30 p.m. No sender, no request, just placed there like I'd asked for it myself. I didn't accept it. I didn't delete it. I drove. I parked in the same underground lot I'd used for years. The walls were still stained from old leaks. The same buzz echoed from the overhead lights. But that day, the air was heavy. Not hot. Just charged. I leaned against the car door before going in. Eyes closed. One deep breath. Then two. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't what I got. She was already waiting near the back of the lot. Not Claire, but one of her lieutenants. Todd. Same smirk he always wore in meetings. The kind that said he was used to people nodding when he spoke, even when he didn't make much sense. He stepped out from between two parked SUVs like he'd been waiting to be seen. "Hey," he said, as if we'd bumped into each other at the grocery store. "Just wanted to catch you for a sec." I nodded, said nothing. He scratched his cheek. "There's a lot going on. You probably know that." I didn't answer. I let the pause stretch, just long enough. He cleared his throat. "I'm not trying to step on toes, just trying to help things stay smooth." "Is that right?" He nodded, looking away. "It's better for everyone if there's no tension." He didn't say what tension meant, but his voice dropped just enough that I knew what he was doing. If certain things stay in motion, like they are now, it all gets wrapped up quickly. No need to drag it out. "Wrapped up," I repeated, like I was testing the phrase on my tongue. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're all hoping it doesn't get difficult. You know how these things go. Lawyers, press, reputations." "Yours or mine?" I asked. He blinked, caught off guard. "I'm just saying," he backpedaled, "no one wants this to become messy, especially you." I let that sit. Then I said calmly, "If there's anything you need to say, Todd, I suggest you put it in writing." His expression cracked, just slightly. "I think this conversation's done," I added. And I got in the car. I didn't slam the door. I didn't even speed off. I just left. Back home, I locked the door behind me. Not because I felt unsafe, but because something had shifted. This wasn't about a marriage anymore. It wasn't even about the company. It was about pressure, disguised as formality, building toward force. I went to the office, closed the blinds, and sat down at the desk. For the first time, I opened every drawer, pulled out every USB drive, sorted through old emails, memos, calendars. I wasn't looking to strike back. I wasn't chasing justice. I was building a record. Every file I touched, every note I found, I named and backed up. Twice. I wasn't gathering ammunition. I was putting on armor. Because the moment you stop playing their game quietly, they start pushing harder. And I wasn't about to be pushed off the board. That was the moment they stopped assuming I'd stay quiet and started trying to shut me down. When pressure turns into force, you learn very quickly who's prepared and who's bluffing. That realization didn't come with some dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, in the dim glow of my office at 2 a.m., surrounded by open folders, sticky notes, and decades of paper trails. I hadn't meant to turn my office into a command center, but that's what it became. For 2 weeks after the boardroom ambush, I said almost nothing to anyone. But at night, when the house was still, I dug. Not because I was looking for revenge. I just needed to know how far they'd gone while assuming I wasn't watching. Emails from 10 years ago, contracts I'd co-drafted but never signed, meeting minutes with my initials and margins but never on the final slides. There were fingerprints everywhere. Mine. Just not the kind that showed up in public. I started with our first joint project. It was branded as hers by the time it launched, but I had the original draft. Word for word, slide for slide. The metadata didn't lie. My name, my timestamps. That was just the beginning. Each discovery made the picture clearer, not just of what had been taken, but of how easy it had been because I hadn't expected anyone I loved to do it. That was my blind spot. The deeper I went, the more obvious it became. They'd built their structure on the assumption that I would never look back, that I would stay polite, quiet, removed. That assumption was their mistake. They had grown used to my silence, relied on it. It was their blind spot now. They didn't prepare for the version of me who could still think clearly when hurt. They never imagined I'd track dates, compare file versions, organize evidence not in anger but in precision. And I didn't rush to act. I wasn't reckless. That was their style, not mine. Instead, I scheduled a second meeting with my attorney. I brought a box with me, small, heavy. Inside, a USB drive, printouts, handwritten notes, copies of emails. I didn't say much when I arrived. Just set the box on the table and let him read. 20 minutes passed before he looked up. "This," he said slowly, "this changes things." I nodded. "How much?" He adjusted his glasses. "We're not defending anymore." I let the silence sit between us. Let that statement land. He leaned back in his chair. "Some of these documents contradict sworn statements. Others show contributions they've denied you ever made. And this," he held up a printout of a signed agreement. "This was never disclosed during the asset review." "They thought I didn't keep copies." He smirked. "They counted on it." He grew quiet again. Then, more serious. "This isn't just about what you've lost. It's about what they tried to erase, intentionally. We're not just playing defense now. We're holding leverage." I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. But a part of me, long pressed down, stood a little taller. We didn't file anything that week. No lawsuits, no threats. Just a single message, delivered through counsel. It was short, professional, neutral in tone. Just a clarification of timelines, contributions, and discrepancies between known facts and formal statements. No accusations. Just receipts. It wasn't a threat, but it was loud enough to shift the room without raising my voice. For the first time, they had to consider that I might not vanish quietly. By the end of the next day, I noticed the tone change. The silence from their end wasn't comfortable anymore. It was calculating. There was a reason for that. Because once you introduce truth into a game built on assumption, people scramble. And when they scramble, they reveal what they never meant to. That night, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like the moment before a storm hits, when the sky darkens just enough to tell you to shut the windows. I knew they'd respond. I knew it wouldn't be graceful. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't bracing for impact. I was preparing for it. I checked locks. I reread every email I'd ever sent from my work account. I updated passwords. I printed physical copies of everything and stored them in 3 different places. This wasn't paranoia. It was protocol, because silence had protected them long enough. Now it was protecting me. I thought they would back off. Instead, they came after me harder than ever. And that's when everything I'd prepared was put to the test. 3 weeks had passed since that first board meeting, the one where I was treated like a ghost, haunting my own legacy. And now I was walking back into the same room, same walls, same table. Only this time, I wasn't alone. My attorney, Thomas, walked beside me, his briefcase tight in his grip. He didn't speak. Neither did I. But I could feel the shift in the air before we even reached the door. This wasn't the same meeting anymore. When we stepped inside, the conversations halted like someone had flipped a switch. No greetings, no small talk. Just eyes watching me with something new. Calculation. She was already seated, flanked by 2 people I recognized from compliance. She didn't smile, didn't blink, just folded her hands neatly on the table and nodded once, as if acknowledging a necessary nuisance. I nodded back. No satisfaction, no ego, just readiness. The chair of the board called the session to order. Formalities were read into the record. Everyone behaved like this was another procedural step. But I knew better. I could see it in the way their pens moved slower, how they glanced, too often, at my side of the table. Then they made their move. Midway through the meeting, a document was introduced, thin, stapled, handed out 1 copy at a time. A supplemental statement, they called it, just a few pages. But inside was something else entirely. They questioned my motives for returning, cited my emotional involvement, phrased carefully, strategically, like they'd spent hours combing the line between slander and plausible deniability. There were no direct accusations, just carefully seeded doubt, allegations of bias, concerns about judgment, and at the bottom, a recommendation to postpone any vote involving my reinstatement or project ownership until independent clarity could be established. It was a quiet hit job, polished, paper-wrapped poison. I could feel my attorney's gaze slide toward me, waiting. I didn't flinch. I didn't respond. Instead, I let the room sit with the silence. They expected outrage, maybe even a retreat. What they got was stillness. I reached for my water, took a slow sip, and glanced down, not at the statement, but at the pen in front of me. Silver, heavy, the same one she used to leave on the kitchen counter, the one I once signed birthday cards with. I picked it up and set it down. Let them wonder. Thomas adjusted in his seat, then opened his briefcase without a word. From inside, he pulled out a folder, not thick, but dense. The weight of documentation isn't measured in pages. It's measured in consequences. He slid the folder forward and said calmly, "We'd like to respond in kind." Inside were documents, originals, signed drafts of early proposals with my name clearly affixed, email threads where decisions were jointly approved, budget allocations with my login stamps, and one clause, one overlooked clause, in a partnership agreement that made their postponement request moot, irrevocable authority, binding vote, dated, time-stamped, verified. As Thomas walked the room through the timeline, their expressions shifted. A woman on the far left stopped taking notes. One of the legal aides looked down and scratched their chin, as if suddenly very interested in the texture of the table. The chair tapped his knuckle twice, then cleared his throat. No one said a word. And still, I didn't gloat. There was no victory in this, just clarity. The board moved fast after that. No discussion, no further objections. A motion was called to ratify project authority as originally filed. Seconded, voted, unanimous. Even she didn't speak. The gavel tapped once. The room held its breath. And I didn't look at her. Not because I couldn't, but because it no longer mattered. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. A system doing what it should have done the first time had people been honest. When the vote was over, the room went quiet. And for the first time, she had nothing left to say. The hardest part wasn't winning. It was figuring out what came after. I stepped out of the building into early morning light, still bleached and cold from the overnight chill. The glass doors clicked shut behind me, and just like that, there was no applause, no handshake waiting, no smile to meet me, just the hum of traffic, a distant siren, a city returning to its business. I walked slowly toward the sidewalk, one foot, then the other, not out of fatigue, but because the weight had shifted so suddenly, I wasn't sure how to carry myself. Victory wasn't supposed to sound like this. It sounded like pigeons fluttering off a bench when I got too close, like an espresso machine hissing from the cafe across the street, like the gentle thud of my own shoes on concrete. The world hadn't changed just because I had. I made it to my car, sat for a while before turning the key. I didn't check my phone. I didn't speak to anyone. I just stared through the windshield, watching the clouds slide across the morning sky like they always had. Even after everything, the sky didn't look any different. On the drive home, I passed familiar signs. A dry cleaner that still had my name on a plastic tag. The florist my daughter once dragged me into for Mother's Day. None of them knew what had just happened. Or if they did, they didn't care. And maybe that was the point. Back home, the house was quiet. Comfortably so this time. No silent treatment, no waiting for someone to return and fill the space. Just me and the sound of the refrigerator humming. I hung my coat, took off my shoes, and walked straight to the kitchen where a small stack of legal documents sat waiting on the counter. They were clean, final, and dry. I took a deep breath, picked up the pen. Not hers. Mine. The one I had found tucked in the drawer of my home office, bought years ago during a business trip to Seattle. I used to think it was too nice for everyday use, but now it felt right. Practical. Certain. I signed everything without rushing, without stalling. No second guessing, no looking for hidden clauses. And when I finished, I didn't leave the pen on the counter. I slipped it into my shirt pocket. That simple motion, tucking it close, meant something I hadn't expected. It was mine. The decision, the moment, the pen, all mine. Later that afternoon, the news began to spread. Not loudly, not through headlines or social media storms. Just quiet confirmations. A couple of resignations. Internal audits. No one dragged anyone through the mud. There were no press releases painting anyone a hero or a villain. And yet, the consequences were real. I was asked to consult on transition plans, but I declined. Not out of anger, just clarity. My part in that story was finished. Hanging around wouldn't change what came next, for them, or for me. I spent the rest of the day at home clearing out old folders from my filing cabinet. Not out of spite, not even out of symbolism. Just to make space, the kind of space that doesn't shout new beginnings, but quietly invites them. In the evening, I made a simple dinner. Grilled vegetables, brown rice, nothing fancy. I sat at the kitchen table where so many negotiations, arguments, and silent treatments had unfolded. But tonight, there was no tension in the air, just the soft clink of my fork against the plate. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. And in that steadiness, something settled inside me. I didn't need to rewrite history. I didn't need her to apologize. There were good years, real ones. That mattered. And then it ended. That mattered too. Closure didn't come with a bang. It came like dusk, gradually, quietly, without asking permission. As night came on, I walked through each room slowly, flicking off lights, straightening a picture frame, adjusting a chair. It was my house now, not just legally, emotionally, practically. No part of me was still waiting for someone to return and explain themselves. I wasn't starting over. I was simply continuing from where I had paused. And this time, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. As I reached the hallway and flipped the last switch, the living room dimmed behind me. I felt the weight ease from my shoulders, not vanish, but shift, carried differently now, not because I had someone to help me hold it, but because I'd learned how to hold it myself. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't signing away my place in someone else's life. I was choosing my own.